should have smelled a rat when they dangled $100 an hour for tour guiding. But when you're staring down 3 months of overdue rent and your student loans are snowballing faster than a blizzard in Montana, you don't exactly interrogate Lady Luck. That eviction notice had been mocking me from my door for a fortnight, a constant reminder of my studio apartment that reeked of mold and shattered dreams. The job posting materialized on a Tuesday morning, buried in the classifieds of some obscure employment website I'd never encountered. Specialized tour guide position, private museum, $100 per hour, discretion required, serious inquiries only. It read, devoid of a company name or location, just an encrypted email address and a stern warning that applications would only be considered for 48 hours. I shot off my resume faster than a bullet. The interview materialized 3 days later via an encrypted video call. All I could see on the screen was a darkened room, a single lamp illuminating a woman's hands as she shuffled papers. Her voice was a soft, hushed whisper, laced with an accent I couldn't quite place. "Mr. Mercer," she enunciated, each syllable dripping with precision. "Your educational background in art history is adequate. Tell me, what course of action would you take if a guest insisted on touching an exhibit, despite clear and explicit instructions to refrain from doing so?" I would explain the importance of preservation and gently steer their focus towards other pieces, I replied, trying to project an air of professionalism despite the bizarre circumstances. "And if they offered you money? A considerable sum?" The question threw me for a loop. I would uphold the museum's policies, regardless of any financial incentives. A beat of silence, the rustle of papers. "Very good. Are you prepared to relocate immediately?" "Relocate? The position necessitates on-site residence. Full room and board provided, in addition to your hourly wage. The location is quite remote." My mind raced, calculating my spiraling debts, my barren refrigerator, the increasingly aggressive voicemails from my landlord. "Yes, I can relocate." "Excellent. You will receive GPS coordinates within the hour. Pack light. Everything you require will be provided." The line went dead, leaving me in silence. The coordinates guided me through 3 hours of treacherous, winding mountain roads, deeper into the Montana wilderness than I had ever ventured. My aging Honda groaned under the strain of the elevation changes, and a knot of worry began to tighten in my stomach. The last gas station was a distant memory, 50 miles back, and my cell phone stubbornly displayed no signal. And then I saw it. Blackwood Estate materialized from the dense forest, a scene ripped straight from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of imposing dark stone and intricate wrought iron, complete with towers and gargoyles that seemed to scrutinize my every move. Tall, arched windows gleamed in the fading afternoon light, and meticulously manicured gardens surrounded the structure, a stark contrast to the untamed wilderness. I parked in a circular driveway paved with polished black stone and grabbed my solitary duffel bag. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the massive oak door swung silently inward. "Mr. Mercer." The woman from the video call stood before me, though her face remained shrouded in shadow. She was tall and gaunt, clad in a severe black suit that seemed to belong to another era. Her skin was as pale as parchment, and as she spoke, I noticed the unsettling fact that she never seemed to blink. "I am Mrs. Cordelia Vale, curator of this establishment. Welcome. Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Vale. This place is incredible." She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Follow me." The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Marble floors reflected the dazzling light from crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings encased in heavy gold frames adorned the walls. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood, mingled with something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach churn ever so slightly. "The museum is only open on Saturday evenings," Mrs. Vale explained, her voice echoing through the seemingly endless corridors. 6 p.m. precisely. Our clientele is quite exclusive, individuals who appreciate unique experiences and can afford the $50,000 admission fee. My feet nearly faltered beneath me. $50,000 per visit. Her voice remained devoid of any discernible emotion. They come seeking what conventional museums cannot provide: authenticity, genuine historical artifacts with impeccable provenance. We ascended a winding spiral staircase to the second floor, and then another to the third. Mrs. Vale produced a key and unlocked a door at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. Your quarters. The apartment was opulent, exceeding anything I had ever dreamed of. Gleaming hardwood floors, a king-size bed draped in luxurious linens, a fully stocked kitchen, and expansive windows that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding forest. A massive 65-inch television dominated one wall, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined another. "This is incredible," I stammered, setting down my bag. "But I noticed there's no internet connection, and my phone still has no signal." "The isolation is intentional," Mrs. Vale replied, her gaze unwavering. "Our guests value privacy above all else. You will find everything you require here. Meals are provided in the staff dining room on the first floor." She handed me a laminated card. "These are the house rules. Study them carefully." I scanned the 8 rules printed in crisp black text. Never look directly at the weeping woman portrait in the blue room during tours. If you hear children laughing emanating from the nursery, immediately vacate the premises and lock the door. The Bone Garden exhibit closes at 8 p.m. sharp. No exceptions. Never touch the music box in the Victorian room, even if guests request it. If the grandfather clock chimes 13 times, escort all guests to the main hall immediately. The basement level is strictly off-limits to tours. Redirect any guest interest. Always count your tour group both before and after each room. If you observe your reflection behaving independently, inform Mrs. Vale immediately. I glanced up, expecting some sort of explanation, but Mrs. Vale was already at the door. "These rules have been meticulously developed over decades of operation," she stated, without so much as a glance in my direction. "They exist for survival, not showmanship. Breakfast is served at 7 a.m. Your first tour commences tomorrow evening." She closed the door, leaving me alone with my mounting questions and a rapidly growing sense of unease. Saturday arrived with unsettling speed. I dedicated Friday to exploring the museum's public areas, familiarizing myself with the exhibits that would form the core of my tours. Each room boasted a theme, and the artifacts were unlike anything I'd seen in traditional museums. The Blue Room showcased European paintings spanning the Renaissance through the Victorian eras. Its centerpiece was a portrait of a woman in white, painted tears streaming down her cheeks. Even a peripheral glance at it made me deeply uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate why. The nursery overflowed with antique dolls, children's toys, and a small white coffin labeled, "Baby Blackwood, Beloved Son, 1923 to 1923. The dolls seemed to watch my every move as I navigated the room, their glass eyes following me. The Bone Garden was perhaps the most deeply unsettling exhibit. It was indoors, yet meticulously designed to resemble a Victorian cemetery garden. Marble statues stood sentinel among carefully arranged displays of human bones and skulls, some dating back centuries, according to their placards. The centerpiece was a stunning statue of a woman reaching towards the ceiling, her marble face frozen in an eternal expression of anguish. The Victorian room felt more conventional, furnished with period pieces, including an ornate music box on the central table. Its surface was adorned with intricate carvings of dancing figures, and I felt an inexplicable urge to wind it and hear its melody. At precisely 6 p.m., the first guests arrived. They emerged from expensive cars with tinted windows, a group of 12 individuals who spoke in hushed tones and wore clothing that likely cost more than my annual salary. I didn't recognize any of them, but their demeanor suggested serious wealth and power. Mrs. Vale introduced me simply as your guide for this evening's experience, and I led them through the exhibits. They listened to my prepared presentations with polite attention, occasionally asking questions about provenance and historical significance. What struck me most was their casual cruelty. During a discussion about medieval torture devices, one guest chuckled about employees who needed motivation. Another made offhand comments about disposing of problems that made my skin crawl. They spoke of human suffering as entertainment, of pain as a commodity to be purchased. Yet they seemed harmless enough, just wealthy people with twisted senses of humor. The evening passed without incident, and I began to relax. The second day's tour group was smaller, but equally wealthy Russian oligarchs, according to Mrs. Vale, who appreciated historical extremes. They were particularly captivated by the bone garden, asking detailed questions about the origin of each skull and bone fragment. "Are these genuine?" one asked, scrutinizing a display case containing what appeared to be fresh organs suspended in glass jars. "All our exhibits are authentic," I replied, though something about those organs deeply bothered me. They looked too fresh, too real. As we moved through the Victorian room, I was careful to steer guests away from the music box, remembering Rule 4. One of the Russians noticed my avoidance. "What's in the box?" he inquired. "A lovely music box from the 1880s, I said. "Unfortunately, it's too fragile for handling." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, though I caught him staring at it longingly as we left the room. Both tours concluded successfully, with guests expressing satisfaction and Mrs. Vale's approval evident in her slight nod. I began to believe the rules were simply eccentric policies designed to maintain atmosphere for thrill-seeking millionaires. How wrong I was. As I settled into my apartment that second night, I felt confident about my new position. The work was easy, the pay was excellent, and despite the isolation, I was finally getting ahead financially. The rules seemed manageable, just quirky policies to add mystique to an already atmospheric experience. I had no idea they were the only thing standing between me and something far more terrible than I could imagine. I fell asleep that night, thinking I'd finally caught a break. I should have paid more attention to the way the exhibits seemed to watch me. I should have wondered why the tears on the weeping woman's cheeks looked wet despite being painted centuries ago. I should have questioned why children's toys in the nursery occasionally moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. But I was desperate, grateful, and willfully blind to the signs. Tomorrow would change everything. The third day at the Blackwood Estate Museum started like any other, but I should have known my false sense of security wouldn't last long. Tuesday morning found me rehearsing tour presentations in the empty halls, my voice echoing off marble floors and oil-painted ancestors. The Russian oligarchs were scheduled to arrive that evening, and Mrs. Vale had emphasized their particular interest in authentic historical experiences. I was in the Blue Room practicing my discussion of Renaissance portraiture when curiosity overcame caution. The weeping woman portrait drew my gaze like a magnet. Despite Rule 1's clear warning, I found myself looking directly into her painted eyes. Time seemed to freeze. The woman's eyes, which had been staring demurely downward in the classic portrait pose, slowly lifted to meet mine. Her painted pupils dilated with impossible life, and black tears began streaming down her pale cheeks. The tears weren't just paint anymore. They were wet, real, flowing down the canvas and pooling on the ornate gold frame. My heart hammered against my ribs as the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Dark red liquid began seeping from behind the frame, trickling down the wall in thin rivulets. "You should not have looked," a voice whispered, though the painted lips never moved. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking, and fled the room just as footsteps approached from the corridor. "Mr. Mercer." Mrs. Vale appeared at the doorway, her pale face showing no surprise at the blood-streaked portrait behind me. "Preparing for this evening's guests, I see. The painting, it was bleeding." The eyes moved. "Yes." She stepped past me with a white cloth, calmly cleaning the blood from the wall and frame. Rule 1 exists for precisely this reason. The guests appreciate authentic supernatural experiences, but they assume it's all theatrical effects. You, however, know better now. As she worked, the painted woman's eyes had returned to their original position. With their gazes fixed downward, the tears were once more like mere brushstrokes. Yet I felt her observation even when I wasn't looking directly at her. "The rules exist for survival, not for show," Mrs. Vale stated, her voice a chilling breeze that sent shivers down my spine. "Remember that." The evening's tour continued without any further incidents, though I made a conscious effort to keep my eyes averted from the weeping woman. The Russian guests, in particular, seemed amused by my obvious discomfort within the blue room, chuckling amongst themselves in their native tongue. Guide seems nervous. One of them remarked in accented English, "Makes experience more authentic." Little did they know just how truly authentic it was. Wednesday arrived, bringing with it the sound of children's laughter. I was alone in the nursery, dusting the display cases and rearranging the antique dolls, when I heard it. Soft giggling, reminiscent of young children at play. The sound appeared to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, echoing off the walls in a way that made my skin crawl. Following rule number 2, I immediately exited the room and turned the key in the lock. However, instead of walking away, I found myself irresistibly drawn to peer through the old-fashioned keyhole. The sight that greeted me defied any rational explanation. The dolls were moving, not all at once, but in subtle, coordinated movements that suggested an underlying intelligence. A porcelain girl with golden ringlets turned her head to smile at something beyond my perception. A boy dressed in a sailor suit sat up within his display case and clapped his hands silently. They were playing with unseen companions, their glass eyes reflecting a light that wasn't actually present. The small white coffin, labeled Baby Blackwood, Beloved Son, 1923 to 1923, rocked gently back and forth, as if someone were soothing the infant within. The giggling grew louder, more insistent, and I thought I could discern whispered words. "Come play with us. Come play forever." I retreated from the door, my hands trembling uncontrollably. That night, pale children invaded my dreams, calling my name with voices that sounded like wind rustling through autumn leaves. They implored me to unlock the door, to join their endless games in the nursery where time had come to a standstill in 1923. I awoke drenched in sweat, the echoing sound of children's laughter still ringing in my ears. Thursday introduced a new kind of horror temptation. Mrs. Corrin had returned, a pharmaceutical heiress whose previous visit had concluded with her offering increasingly substantial sums of money to hear the Victorian room's music box play. Tonight, she was back, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Surely we can come to an arrangement," she said, cornering me after the formal tour had ended. Her perfume was expensive, but it couldn't mask a rottenness that lingered beneath. $20,000 cash just to wind the box once. I thought of my student loans, my maxed-out credit cards, the eviction notice that had initiated this entire nightmare. $20,000 would resolve everything. But Mrs. Vale's warning reverberated in my mind. The rules exist for survival. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Corrin. Museum policy is very strict regarding the handling of antique pieces." Her face contorted with frustration, mixed with something darker. "You stupid little man. Do you have any idea who I am? What I could do to you?" Before I could offer a response, the music box began to play on its own accord. The lid popped open, revealing tiny dancing figures that spun to a haunting lullaby, seemingly older than sorrow itself. Everyone in the room began to weep uncontrollably, tears streaming down their faces, their shoulders shaking with inexplicable grief. Even Mrs. Corrin, despite her threats and bluster, stood there sobbing like a lost child. The melody wrapped itself around my heart and squeezed, pulling up memories of every loss, every disappointment, every moment of despair I had ever experienced. The other guests wept openly, their masks of wealth and power dissolving in the face of profound, inexplicable sadness. When the box finally closed, silence fell like a heavy curtain. The guests wiped their eyes, embarrassed by their public display of emotion, and quickly dispersed. Mrs. Corrin shot me a look of pure hatred before stalking out, but the lullaby followed me to my apartment that night, weaving through my dreams and waking thoughts. I found myself humming it unconsciously, the melody taking root in my mind like a parasite. Friday brought the impossible. I was leading a group of tech moguls through their tour when the grandfather clock in the main hall began to chime. Nothing unusual about that. It was 8 p.m., closing time for the Bone Garden exhibit, according to rule number 3. But the clock didn't stop at 8 chimes. 9, 10, 11, 12. Then, impossibly, a 13th chime rang out, its deep bronze tone seeming to shake the very foundations of the building. Rule number 5 was crystal clear. If the grandfather clock chimes 13 times, escort all guests to the main hall immediately. I didn't hesitate. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please follow me to the main hall for refreshments, I announced, my voice somehow remaining steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. As we walked through the corridors, I could hear the building itself groaning and settling in ways that defied architectural logic. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like living flesh. The eyes in the portraits followed our progress, and the temperature dropped noticeably with each step. Mrs. Vale was waiting in the main hall with a silver service of wine and delicate pastries, as if she had been expecting us. Her smile was serene, but her eyes held depths I didn't want to explore. "Please enjoy the refreshments while you take in the view," she said, gesturing toward the tall windows that overlooked the Blackwood Estates grounds. I looked outside and felt my sanity slip another notch. The forest was writhing, ancient pines bent and twisted like rubber, their branches reaching toward the windows with what looked like gnarled fingers. The moon cast shadows that moved independently of their sources, dancing across the snow in patterns that hurt to watch. In the distance, I could swear I saw figures moving between the trees, tall, impossibly thin shapes that seemed to glide rather than walk. The guests, they sipped their wine, offering appreciative murmurs about the incredible special effects and the immersive atmosphere. Little did they know they were witnessing something genuinely supernatural, something that could likely tear them apart without even trying. "Remarkable showmanship," one remarked. "The investment in these illusions must be extraordinary." As I watched them, I wanted to scream, to shake them, to force them to actually see what was happening. But what would be the point? They inhabited a world where everything was for sale, controlled, explained away. They simply couldn't conceive of forces beyond their influence. After an hour, the forest returned to normal. The trees stood straight and still. The shadows behaved as shadows should, and the 13th chime's echo finally faded from the air. Mrs. Vale graciously escorted the guests to their vehicles, and I was left alone with questions I was afraid to voice. That night, I lay in my luxurious prison of an apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what was happening to me. The rules weren't arbitrary policies designed to simply add atmosphere. They were warnings, barriers erected between the museum's visitors and something that desperately wanted to break free. But barriers against what exactly? I was beginning to understand that the Blackwood Estate Museum existed in the spaces between the world I knew and something else entirely. The rules weren't just protecting the guests from the exhibits. They were protecting everyone from the hungry darkness that lived in the walls, fed on suffering, and waited patiently for someone to make a mistake. Each violation had consequences. Each broken rule invited something terrible a little closer. The weeping woman's painted eyes had shown me they were watching, always watching. The children in the nursery wanted playmates for their eternal games. The music box sought to drown the world in sorrow. The grandfather clock measured time that shouldn't exist. And I was trapped here, walking the razor's edge between following rules that made no sense and unleashing horrors that made far too much sense. Mrs. Vale's words haunted my dreams. The rules exist for survival, not showmanship. I was starting to understand that survival might be more complicated than I'd imagined, and that the worst violations might yet be ahead of me. As I finally drifted toward an uneasy sleep, the children's laughter echoed softly through the walls, and somewhere in the distance, a music box played its sorrowful tune. The weeping woman's painted tears felt real against my dreams, and 13 chimes counted down to something I didn't want to name. The rules were all that stood between me and the darkness. But how long could I keep following them before the darkness found another way in? The weekend passed in a haze of sleepless nights and haunted thoughts. By Monday of my second week, the false comfort I'd found in following the rules had evaporated like morning mist. The museum's whispers followed me everywhere, soft voices that spoke in languages I didn't recognize, footsteps in empty corridors, and the constant sensation of being watched by invisible eyes. I found myself drawn to forbidden places with increasing frequency, my rational mind losing the battle against a curiosity that had become an obsession. The rules that had once seemed like simple guidelines now felt like prison bars, and with each passing hour, I understood less about my situation while becoming more deeply entangled in it. It was Tuesday night when I discovered the basement. Unable to sleep, I wandered the corridors in my pajamas, hoping exhaustion might finally claim me. The grandfather clock's steady ticking echoed through the halls, marking time that felt increasingly meaningless in this place where past and present blurred together like watercolors in rain. As I walked, my bare feet made no sound on the marble floors, and the portraits seemed to track my progress with their painted eyes. That's when I noticed the basement door standing slightly ajar. The heavy iron slab, carved with twisted vines and staring eyes that seemed to follow my movement, had always been locked tight. Rule 6 was explicit. The basement level is off limits to tours. Redirect any guest interest. But tonight, cold air seeped through the crack, carrying scents of damp earth and something metallic that made my stomach turn and my mouth fill with saliva in that way that precedes vomiting. My rational mind screamed warnings, but curiosity had become a hunger I couldn't ignore. The door groaned on ancient hinges as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the building like a death rattle. Stone steps descended into absolute darkness, each one worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air grew colder with every step, and I could hear something dripping in the distance, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Each step creaked under my weight as I made my way down, my phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom like a knife through black velvet. The basement was vast, far larger than the building's footprint should have allowed. Gothic arches supported a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow, and the air was thick with an oppressive weight that made breathing difficult. Condensation formed on the stone walls, running down in patterns that looked disturbingly like tears. But it was the display cases that stopped my heart. Arranged throughout the space like some twisted museum exhibition, dozens of glass coffins stood illuminated by an eerie green light that seemed to emanate from within the cases themselves. The light pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a massive heart beating somewhere in the darkness. "Dear God," I whispered, the words echoing in the silence and coming back to me distorted, as if the building itself was mocking my prayer. Living people lay within those cases, their eyes wide and aware, following my movement with desperate intensity. Their skin had taken on a waxy, preserved quality, pale as candle wax, but with an underlying translucence that revealed veins and arteries beneath. They were undeniably alive, their chests rising and falling in shallow breaths, but trapped in some horrific state. Living people lay within those cases, their eyes wide and aware, following my movement with desperate intensity. Their skin had taken on a waxy, preserved quality, pale as candle wax, but with an underlying translucence that revealed veins and arteries beneath. They were undeniably alive, their chests rising and falling in shallow breaths, but trapped in some horrific state. Suspended between life and death, their mouths moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear but understood instinctively. "Help us. Please don't leave us here." Some had been there so long that their hair had grown out in wild tangles, and their fingernails had extended into claw-like points from scratching uselessly at their glass prisons. Others looked fresher, their expressions still holding traces of the shock and disbelief that must have accompanied their entrapment. Small brass plaques adorned each case, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the green light in nauseating patterns. I read them with growing horror, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Former staff member, James Morrison, acquired 1987. Violation, attempted escape. Disobedient guest, Mrs. Catherine Holt, vintage 2019. Violation, excessive cruelty to servants. Tour guide, Maria Santos, collected 2003. Violation, breaking rule 4. Night watchman David Chun, preserved 1995. Violation, accessing basement level. The plaques went on and on, each one documenting a life cut short, a soul claimed by this terrible place. I realized with mounting dread that every person who had crossed the museum's mysterious boundaries, who had violated its rules or outlived their usefulness, ended up here. This wasn't a museum displaying historical artifacts. It was a collection of living trophies, evidence of the estate's insatiable hunger for human suffering. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from trembling fingers and clattering across the stone floor. The light spun wildly before settling, casting dancing shadows that made the preserved figures seem to writhe in their glass prisons. In that chaotic moment, I could swear I heard them all screaming, a chorus of agony that existed just below the threshold of human hearing. Footsteps echoed from the floor above. Mrs. Vale was making her nightly rounds, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm I had come to know and dread. Heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my phone and fled up the stairs 3 at a time, closing the basement door as silently as possible. But as I crept back to my apartment on legs that felt like water, I felt those desperate eyes following me, pleading silently for a salvation I couldn't provide. Their silent screams followed me into my dreams, and I woke with tears on my cheeks that I couldn't remember shedding. Wednesday brought confirmation of my worst fears. I was leading a group of pharmaceutical executives through the Bone Garden when I noticed something wrong. The tour had started with 12 guests, all of them wearing expensive suits and discussing the latest stock prices with the casual indifference of people for whom human suffering was merely a line item on a balance sheet. But as we prepared to exit the garden, I counted only 11. Mrs. Corrin, the heiress who had tried to bribe me over the music box, was missing. I counted again, then a third time, my panic rising with each recount. She had been there moments ago, making crude jokes about the skull displays and commenting on how she might like to add similar decorations to her own estate. Now she was simply gone, as if she had never existed at all. Mrs. Vale, I said quietly, approaching the curator, who had appeared at the garden's entrance as if summoned by my distress. She stood perfectly still in her black dress, hands folded in front of her like a funeral director. One of our guests seems to have wandered off. Her pale lips curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of a spider watching a fly struggle in its web. Sometimes, she said in her whisper-soft voice, the collection acquires new pieces. A chill ran down my spine like ice water. What do you mean? Mrs. Corrin showed a particular cruelty toward her employees, didn't she? Spoke of disposing of problems like they were nothing more than inconvenient objects. Mrs. Vale's eyes never left mine, and I saw in them a depth of knowledge that stretched back decades, perhaps centuries. She bragged about forcing pregnant women to work during labor, about denying medical care to save money. The museum has little patience for such callousness. The remaining guests chatted among themselves, completely oblivious to their companion's disappearance. They discussed merger opportunities and hostile takeovers with the same casual tone they might use to discuss the weather, their expensive watches glinting in the lamplight as they gestured dismissively about human lives. That night, I accessed the security footage from my apartment's computer terminal. What I saw would haunt me forever. The cameras showed Mrs. Corrin examining the bone displays with obvious delight, making crude jokes about the arrangement of skulls and femurs in artistic patterns. She picked up a child's skull, turning it over in her manicured hands while commenting on its perfect proportions, and wondering aloud if she could commission similar pieces for her garden parties. Then, as she leaned close to read a placard describing the skull's origin, skeletal hands emerged from the shadows beneath the central mausoleum. They moved with impossible fluidity, like liquid bone flowing upward from the earth itself. The hands, impossibly strong and covered in rotting flesh that peeled away in wet strips, grasped her ankles and pulled. Mrs. Corrin's scream was cut short as she disappeared into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the camera's light. The shadows writhed for a moment, then settled back into stillness as if nothing had happened. The skull she had been holding rolled across the floor and came to rest against a display case, its empty socket staring directly into the camera lens. The other guests continued their tour, completely oblivious to their companion's fate. They stepped around the spot where she had vanished without a second glance, their conversation never faltering. Thursday night, I tried to leave. I packed my belongings in desperate silence, my hands shaking as I got into stillness as if nothing had happened. The skull she had been holding rolled across the floor and came to rest against a display case, its empty socket staring directly into the camera lens. The other guests continued their tour, completely oblivious to their companion's fate. They stepped around the spot where she had vanished without a second glance, their conversation never faltering. Thursday night, I tried to leave. I packed my belongings in desperate silence, my hands shaking as I folded clothes and gathered what few possessions I'd brought to this cursed place. The memory of those glass cases burned in my mind like acid. I had to escape before I joined their ranks, before I became another brass placard marking a life cut short by forces beyond comprehension. But the Blackwood estate had other plans. I loaded my car under cover of darkness, moving as quietly as possible to avoid detection. The forest seemed unusually still, as if even the animals sensed something unnatural stirring. My headlights cut through the darkness as I drove down the winding road. But something was wrong. The trees looked different, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. The road seemed to curve in directions that defied geometry, bending back on itself in impossible ways. No matter which road I took, I found myself driving in circles. The GPS spun uselessly, showing impossible routes that led nowhere and everywhere at once. The compass in my car spun wildly, never settling on any direction for more than a few seconds. Dense fog rolled in from the forest, so thick I could barely see the hood of my car. It tasted of decay and old blood, coating my tongue with a metallic flavor that made me gag. When the fog finally cleared, I was back in the museum's circular driveway, as if I'd never left at all. My car's odometer showed I had driven nearly 100 miles. But here I was, returned like a dog to its master. Mrs. Vale was waiting for me, her black dress fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. The fabric moved with a life of its own, writhing like liquid shadow around her thin frame. "Going somewhere, Mr. Mercer?" "I quit," I said, trying to inject authority into my voice despite the terror that made my knees shake. "I'm done with this place." She held up a familiar document, my employment contract. In the moonlight, the red ink seemed to pulse with life, flowing across the page like living blood. The paper itself looked different now, older, stained with substances I didn't want to identify. "You signed this in blood, not ink," she said calmly, her voice carrying the certainty of absolute truth. "Such contracts carry bindings that transcend the merely legal. You belong to this place now, as surely as the exhibits belong to their cases. The museum has claimed you, body and soul." I stared at the signature I'd made so casually on my first day, remembering how the pen had felt warm in my hand, how the ink had seemed to flow unusually thick. "That's impossible," I said. "Is it? After everything you've seen? The weeping portrait, the laughing children, the music box that plays sorrow itself. Do you still cling to what you once thought possible?" Her laugh was like wind through dead leaves, brittle and cold. "There is no escape, John. The sooner you accept that, the easier things will be. Fight it, and you'll find yourself in the basement much sooner than necessary." Friday brought a new horror. My reflection began to disobey me. I first noticed it in the bathroom mirror as I shaved, my hands still trembling from the previous night's failed escape attempt. My reflection raised the razor a fraction of a second after I did, as if it were copying my movements rather than mirroring them. When I stopped mid-stroke, confused and disturbed, my reflection continued shaving, its movements becoming more deliberate, more independent. Throughout the day, the phenomenon worsened. In hallway mirrors, my reflected self would smile when I frowned, turn its head when I looked straight ahead, sometimes lingering in the glass even after I'd walked away. Worst of all, it began to look healthier than I felt, its eyes brighter, its complexion clearer, as if it were drawing vitality from my increasingly hollow shell. Remembering Rule 8, I sought out Mrs. Vale in her office, a cluttered room filled with ancient books bound in what looked suspiciously like human skin and artifacts that hurt to look at directly. Candles burned with flames that cast no shadows, and the air was thick with incense that smelled of grave dirt and dying flowers. "It's beginning," she said without surprise when I described what was happening. Not even looking up from the ledger she was writing in with a pen that left marks the color of dried blood. "Prolonged exposure to the museum's influence causes what we call spiritual splitting. Your reflection is becoming autonomous, preparing to replace you entirely." "Replace me? The museum feeds on souls, Mr. Mercer. takes them gradually, layer by layer, like peeling an onion. First your free will, then your memories, then your very essence, until nothing remains but an empty shell performing its duties for eternity. Your reflection shows you what you're becoming, or rather what you've already become. That afternoon, I returned to the bone garden with new understanding. The centerpiece statue, a beautiful woman reaching desperately toward the ceiling, her marble face frozen in eternal anguish, tears carved with such skill they seemed wet, wasn't art at all. She was my predecessor, Mrs. Vale said, appearing beside me as if she'd read my thoughts. Her voice carried a note of something that might have been sadness, though it was hard to tell through the layers of resignation and acceptance. Margaret Ashford. She tried to expose what happens here, tried to save the exhibits and warn the world. She even managed to contact a journalist, convinced him to investigate. The museum's response was definitive. How long have you been here? Time loses meaning in a place like this. Long enough to see many guides come and go, each one thinking they could be the exception. Long enough to learn that resistance only brings suffering, and that acceptance, while bitter, is the only path to any kind of peace. Saturday night, I finally understood the children in the nursery, unable to bear their laughter any longer. It had grown louder and more insistent, seeping through the walls at all hours. I spent hours in the museum's small library, poring over family records and historical documents. The books seemed to write themselves as I read, words appearing and disappearing on pages that smelled of old blood and older secrets. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. The children weren't just spirits. They were Cornelius Blackwood's own descendants, sacrificed in occult rituals designed to power the Blackwood estate's supernatural abilities. Each child had been killed on their 5th birthday, their innocent souls trapped in eternal torment, while their life force was channeled into the building itself. They were forced to play games with invisible companions, while their anguish fed the museum's hunger for human suffering. Each ritual had made Blackwood more powerful, more connected to forces beyond human understanding. But the price was the souls of his own children, doomed to an existence of perpetual childhood nightmares. The nursery was their prison, and their laughter was actually screaming, joy and terror blended into something that human ears could barely process. The museum wasn't just displaying horrors. It was powered by them, sustained by the collected agony of everyone who had ever crossed its threshold. As I sat surrounded by dusty tomes and crumbling photographs, I realized the full scope of my situation. This wasn't a job I could quit or a contract I could break. I was already becoming part of the collection, my soul slowly consumed to fuel this monument to human cruelty and supernatural hunger. My reflection in the library's tall windows smiled back at me with increasing independence, its eyes holding knowledge I didn't want to possess. Somewhere in the walls, children laughed with voices like breaking glass. And in the basement, dozens of prisoners waited in their glass cases for a rescue that would never come. The worst part was knowing that tomorrow would bring new guests, new victims drawn by wealth and boredom to witness wonders they couldn't comprehend, and I would guide them through their final tour, just as others had guided me, perpetuating a cycle of horror that stretched back generations. The museum had claimed another soul, and there was nothing left to do but accept my fate and count the days until my own reflection replaced me entirely. Sunday arrived with a weight that pressed against my chest like a gravestone. My reflection had grown stronger overnight, moving independently for minutes at a time while I stood frozen, watching my body perform actions I hadn't chosen. The mirror showed me brushing my teeth while I stood motionless, combing my hair while my hands hung at my sides. Mrs. Vale appeared at my door without knocking, as she always did now. "Tonight is special," she said, her voice carrying undertones I'd learned to fear. "Our most distinguished guests are arriving, individuals who've paid not just for tours, but for participation." Participation in what? The rituals that sustain this place. They believe they're purchasing entertainment, but they're actually feeding the museum's hunger directly. You'll guide them through their final experience. As she spoke, I felt my reflection smile in the hallway mirror behind her, its expression holding knowledge I didn't possess. The splitting was accelerating, my spiritual self preparing for complete replacement. Each guest tonight has committed atrocities that demand cosmic justice, Mrs. Vale continued. A weapons manufacturer who tests products on children. A human trafficking coordinator who ships victims like cargo. A pharmaceutical executive who knowingly sells contaminated medicine to maximize profits. They've come seeking new forms of cruelty to explore. The irony wasn't lost on me. The ultra-wealthy, in their pursuit of exclusive horrors, had stumbled into their own judgment. Saturday evening brought my final tour. 12 guests arrived in armored vehicles, their faces bearing the cold satisfaction of predators who'd never known consequences. They spoke casually about human suffering as entertainment, discussing their previous experiences like restaurant reviews. The last private exhibition in Dubai was disappointing. One commented, adjusting diamond cuff links. The subjects died too quickly. We need something with more sustainability. I led them through the familiar rooms, but tonight felt different. The exhibits pulsed with malevolent energy, responding to the guests' presence like plants turning toward sunlight. The weeping woman's tears flowed more freely, the children's laughter grew louder, and the grandfather clock's ticking seemed to count down to something final. In the blue room, I made my choice. Instead of averting my gaze, I stared directly at the weeping woman's portrait. Her painted eyes met mine with recognition, and blood began streaming from the frame in torrents. But this time I didn't look away. Rule 1. I announced to the startled guests. Never look directly at the weeping woman. I'm breaking it deliberately. Moving to the nursery, I unlocked the door despite the children's frantic laughter echoing from within. Rule 2. I called out. If you hear children laughing, leave immediately. But tonight we're staying. The Victorian room's music box was next. I wound it with deliberate ceremony, its haunting melody filling the air as every person began weeping uncontrollably. Rule 4. Never touch the music box. Consider it touched. I broke every rule systematically, turning the museum's protective barriers into weapons. The grandfather clock chimed 13 times as I led everyone toward the basement. Rule 6. I shouted over the supernatural chaos erupting around us. Basement off limits. Let's visit anyway. The building convulsed like a living thing. Walls bled, portraits screamed, and shadows gained substance and malevolence. The wealthy guests, for the first time in their lives, experienced genuine terror as their money and power proved useless against forces beyond human control. But in the moment of apparent triumph, truth crashed over me like ice water. The basement door swung open, revealing not the glass cases I remembered, but a single mirror reflecting impossible depths. In its surface, I saw myself lying motionless on the museum floor, my body pale and still. The basement door swung open, revealing not the glass cases I remembered, but a single mirror reflecting impossible depths. In its surface, I saw myself lying motionless on the museum floor, my body pale and still. A brass placard nearby read, Tour Guide, John Mercer, deceased week 1, cause, spiritual consumption. I had perished during my first week. Everything since, the rule violations, the escalating horrors, my growing fear and desperate escape attempts, had been elaborate fantasies woven by the museum as it fed upon my soul. My experiences weren't memories at all. They were spiritual sustenance, being slowly and deliberately digested. The reflection in every mirror hadn't been trying to replace me. It had been showing me the horrifying truth. I was already dead, and my reflection was actually my living spirit being consumed piece by piece. Mrs. Vale appeared beside me, no longer the mysterious curator, but revealed as the museum's avatar, a construct designed to shepherd souls through their spiritual feeding. Now you understand, she said, her voice echoing with the accumulated anguish of centuries. Welcome to your eternal role. The wealthy guests dissolved like smoke in the wind. They had been phantoms all along, projections created to give my dying mind something to focus on while the museum consumed my essence. The tours, the rules, the supernatural encounters, all carefully crafted illusions designed to maximize the spiritual nourishment extracted from my soul. I accepted my fate with something approaching a sense of grim relief. The cycle became tragically clear. The museum lured desperate individuals with promises of financial salvation, then fed on their souls while creating elaborate fantasy scenarios to sustain their consciousness during consumption. Each guide eventually recognized the truth and became part of the feeding mechanism, shepherding new victims through the same agonizing process. My reflection stepped out of the mirror, now fully autonomous, ready to continue the cycle of torment. I watched myself become a hollow shell that would perform the curator role for future victims, maintaining the illusion while the museum digested their spiritual essence. New applicants would respond to the job posting, drawn by desperation and the false promise of easy money. They would sign contracts in blood, mistaking it for ordinary ink. They would dismiss the rules as mere eccentricities. They would gradually realize the supernatural truth while their souls were slowly consumed, piece by piece. The pattern was perfect, eternal, inescapable. As my consciousness faded into the museum's collective hunger, I understood my final, horrifying purpose. I became part of the feeding mechanism, another voice whispering in the walls, another set of eyes watching from portraits, another guardian of the rules that both protected and trapped the living. Time ceased to have meaning, losing all relevance. New guides arrived regularly. Struggling art historians, desperate teachers, unemployed museum workers, all drawn by the same deceitful posting that had captured me. I watched them through countless eyes as they repeated my journey. Skepticism, gradual belief, growing horror, desperate resistance, and final, bleak acceptance. But now I must tell you something of vital importance. If you're reading this, you've already been selected as the next victim. The story itself is the trap, carefully laid out. Your engagement with these words has marked you as the museum's next acquisition. Check your email immediately. You'll find the GPS coordinates waiting for you. The encrypted message will seem like a coincidence, a strange coincidence that appeared just after you finished reading these words. Mrs. Vale is expecting you with open arms. She's already prepared your apartment, already printed your contract in your own blood. The pen will feel warm in your hand when you sign, and the ink will seem unusually thick, but you'll attribute that to the expensive writing implement. The $100 hourly wage will solve all your financial problems, or so you'll think. The remote location will seem like a small price to pay for such generous compensation. The rules will appear eccentric, but ultimately harmless. You'll think you're different, smarter, more prepared than those who came before. You'll believe you can outsmart the system, escape the cycle, save yourself and others. But the Blackwood Estate Museum has been perfecting its methods for over a century, growing stronger with each stolen soul. Every soul it claims makes it stronger, more sophisticated in its deceptions. Your story is already written, your ending already determined. The coordinates are waiting patiently in your inbox. Mrs. Vale is expecting you anxiously. Welcome to the Blackwood Estate Museum. We've been waiting for you to arrive for a very long time.